Thank you very much. I have a bit of a challenge today because yesterday the presumed nominee of the Republican Party gave a speech in Washington where he said he was going to lay out the foreign policy of a Donald Trump administration. And I've read this speech very carefully, and I still can't figure out what the foreign policy of Donald Trump is going to be, because it was a very simplistic document in which the potential Republican nominee is going to solve all of our problems by sitting down with the leaders of all the different countries in the world and getting them to do everything that he wants them to do and offering nothing in return. So that is unfortunately one possible future for all of us, the future of a Donald Trump as President of the United States. I'm not going to spend too much time on that of my 12 minutes, except to say that it is likely he's going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. It's fairly clear that he has rejected the traditional Republican foreign policy community. They have gathered together 100, 200 of them and written a letter, all of them promising never to work for him because they disagree with him so strongly. But he nevertheless is succeeding in his political campaign. What's certainly true is that the challenge for other countries around the world in analyzing, understanding, and expecting American foreign policy has become more and more difficult, because there has been a pretty serious pendulum swing in the United States in recent years. When I left office in 2000, I think the previous 2 or 3 administrations had followed more or less a pattern that the world had become comfortable with and understood. They may have preferred one or the other, but they at least understood the basic tenets of what to expect. Well, first we had 8 years of George W. Bush, and he adopted after 9/11 a very, very, strong and arguably aggressive form of American foreign policy. I think in the end it was characterized by the word overreach, that he believed that the United States could solve many of the problems of the Middle East with military power, and that proved to be not possible, and the United States was unable to even stabilize Iraq over nearly a decade, and turned its attention away from Afghanistan during that time. So after the 8 years of overreach, the pendulum swung all the way back to the other side of the spectrum. Under President Obama for 8 years, there's been, I would say arguably a retrenchment of American objectives, an expectation that European countries can solve the problem of Libya, for example, or an expectation that the United States will not engage in the Middle East. And so that overreaction has led to a new set of concerns on the part of many leaders in the world. And so prior to the arrival of Donald Trump on the political scene, it seemed to me that a group of I've been part of a group of 50 or 60 foreign policy professionals from the Republican and Democratic Party had come up with a plan, a program that was somewhere in the middle of that after the swing to one direction and the swing to the other direction, we were coming back to something in the middle that the world could feel quite comfortable with, where the United States was engaged, but engaged with limitations. The United States was involved diplomatically and militarily, that the United States did not expect problems to be solved by others, but wanted to lead, but lead with others. And that form of American foreign policy, I think, is what you are likely to get if Mrs. Clinton is elected President of the United States. I won't be very specific because I can't speak for her at this point, but I think it's fair to say that the United States will feel that the instability and chaos in the Middle East is a challenge the United States needs to stand up for and deal with, unlike the present administration, which essentially believes that the chaos and difficulty in the Middle East is no longer America's primary problem, and that we can stand back from it. And that's the reason why 5 years of war in Syria has led to really only the most modest of changes in the administration's approach, and really the only changes have come about as a result of an effort to defeat ISIS. It's the reason why President Obama has said that he would like to see Saudi Arabia and Iran share the Middle East and the United States step back completely. There's a term for this. It's called offshore balancing. It's a nice idea, but I don't think it's very realistic. Certainly the Saudi Arabian government isn't interested in it, and I suspect the Iranian government is not interested in President Obama shepherding that into existence. So the reality is there are major, major problems in Syria, in Iraq, that are growing in intensity and that threaten to spread to additional countries in the region. And I think a new administration would see those challenges as problems the United States needs to deal with. So for example, Mrs. Clinton has suggested that at a minimum we need to support the opponents of President Assad with much more direct assistance, and not only if they will attack ISIS, but also in their own right if they are opponents of President Assad. It's no wonder that the peace talks in Geneva have collapsed. You can't have a peace agreement when only one party has military leverage. And right now, with the introduction of Russian support for Assad and with Iranian support for Assad, it is only the Assad side of the equation that has any leverage whatsoever in the peace talks. And so it's not likely that they are going to yield or result until there is a balancing of leverage on the political and military side. And at that point, if the parties are exhausted, and again, the outside world is not going to solve this problem until the parties have reached some stage of exhaustion. That's condition number one. Condition number two has to be some form of equality or balance in the leverage of the parties, so that the Assad side both have leverage over the other. And then the United States and the European community, the United Nations, perhaps shepherd in a peace agreement that can end this horrific violence. I mean, the numbers have become so mind-numbing that nobody knows how to appreciate them. But I was interested to see that one of the UN representatives said he's finally prepared to use the number 400,000 dead instead of 200,000 dead. Well, it's no wonder that so many people in Syria are willing to risk their lives, and they're not far from where we are today, and getting on boats and coming to Europe, or risking their lives and going to Libya and then coming across the Mediterranean. I suspect that the refugee policy may hold for a little while, but if the war intensifies, as it always has, every time that people have hoped that it would reduce, it's intensified. The refugee crisis threatens to return again. So that's an example of the kind of middle-of-the-road, centrist, moderate American foreign policy. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump's approach, and I'm just going to reel off a few of the things that he said yesterday and that he's indicated to suggest to you that, you know, there's going to be a pretty exciting time for the journalists if Donald Trump is president. He's basically said that if the rest of the countries of NATO won't pay 3 or 4 or 5 times as much as they're paying today, the United States is going to get out of NATO. He said the same thing about Asia, that if Japan and South Korea won't pay 3, 4, 5 times as much as they're paying today, that he's going to no longer promise to defend them and allow them to defend themselves. He's even, in the case of Japan and South Korea, said that he hasn't repeated it, but he hasn't refuted it either, that he'd be happy to see Japan and South Korea in that situation develop nuclear weapons. And that is a pretty dramatic thing for a president of the United States, to promote the idea of new countries, Japan and South Korea, having nuclear weapons. He says that he will, and this is the key word for him, he's going to sit down and make a deal with whoever it is, whether it's the Russian president or the Chinese president or all these leaders from NATO or the Asian countries. He's going to make a deal, and if they won't make the deal that he wants, he's going to walk away. These deals are the most incredible things. He must come in with some magic wand because he's going to get the Chinese to agree to everything that he wants. No more cyber espionage. No more trading more to the United States than they receive from the United States. Similarly, with Russia, they're going to solve all of their problems in this deal that he's going to make with Putin, that Putin will do all the things that he wants him to do. Well, obviously, this is not serious, and these governments have national interests, and they pursue their interests in these negotiations, and no magic wand of Donald Trump is going to change those national interests. So we're going to have some pretty exciting times if he's president, but at a minimum, I think you're going to see the implementation of a phrase that I thought we had buried deep, deep into the political graveyard of the United States, and that phrase is America First. Now, it sounds okay on the surface. Of course, I'd like to think that when we were in office in the Clinton administration, that we cared about ensuring that American national interests were protected, and that we even put those national interests first over the interests of another country. Naturally, that's what all of us think we're doing when we're engaging in this business. But America First is another idea. America First is an idea that grew in popularity during the period between World War I and World War II, and partially before World War I. And that is the idea of isolationism, that it is not America's problem what goes on in the world. And it was that idea that left America on the sidelines for 2 world wars for many years, world wars that, as all of you know, occurred in Europe and devastated Europe. And I thought we buried that idea. And so I can only hope and pray that the American people have a wiser view than the Republican Party voters who have voted him to be their nominee. And therefore, I think you can imagine who I hope will win. Thank you.